Welcome back to Most Self-Improved, a podcast where we're trying to be a little bit better, focusing on how we can lead engaged, fulfilled lives that bring you joy. I'm Erin Jensen with my lovely co-host, Bhavna Chilakuri.
Hi, everybody.
For this episode, we're speaking with behavioral economist, author, and podcast host, Peter McGraw. I interviewed Peter years ago for a story I wrote for USA Today at the beginning of lockdown about jokes and memes that began popping up during the pandemic. And I feel moved to tell you that I looked up the article the other day in preparation for this, and it started with knock, knock, who's there? No one, because we're isolating.
You wrote that joke?
I did. That was my opener, and people still read it. But so Peter, who was the director of the Humor Research Lab at the University of Colorado Boulder at this time, told me during our 2020 interview that, quote, when you turn tragedy into comedy, you actually make it less of a tragedy, end quote, which is good news for me because I received an email from Peter last November, long time no talk, but Peter was telling me about how he had pivoted from humor to researching singledom. And he had a book coming out. In this pitch email, he listed some facts that I'm sure he thought were great. I found them very scary. He said, quote, 50% of US adults are single, 28% are living alone, and 25% of millennials are projected to never marry, end quote. So that's 1 out of every 4 millennials. And obviously the math that I did is I'm the 1 out of the 4. Obviously. Peter continued in his email, quote, while some of these singles are struggling here, many of them are thriving, end quote. And back in November, that could not have been further from me. Cut to spring 2024. I'm in a much better place about trusting that God has a plan for a fantastic person out there for me. If he's listening now, because of course he is interested in personal growth, my DMs are open. My DMs are open, but there's a lot less sadness for me about being single at the moment. And I am looking forward to getting more information today from Peter about how to mirror some of the things that these thriving singles are doing. So while I wait with hope and expectation, I'm thriving. I'm a thriving single, even if it's not being single by choice. So Bobs, out of all of that, if you're still listening, if you're still with us, knock, knock. If you're still there, what do you think? Also, I'm excited to get your viewpoint from all of this as a married woman too.
I mean, I'm married, but I still feel like I identify.
I'm married. I'm married. Here's the wedding ring.
That's not what I did. No, I think this is a really interesting topic. I feel like I was one of the struggling as well. And I was always amazed by those thriving because they're there. You see them.
Did you see? I never saw.
Yeah, absolutely. No, they're out there. They're out there. I mean, all the trends are pointing towards more and more of them. So I'm excited to see what we can learn from Peter. Welcome, Peter. It's so great to have you here. Before we get deep, an easy question. Please tell our audience just a little bit about your background.
Sure. Well, I'm thrilled to be here. I am a behavioral economist, business school professor, and lifelong bachelor, and have recently turned my attention from one peculiar topic to another, from being a scholar studying humor to a champion for single living. I'm having the time of my life doing this work. I always envisioned the humor project to be a 10-year project. And in part because I think I sort of want to do everything in life. And I was approaching 50 and seeking a new project, and a new, really in many ways, just a new creative task. And I hit on this idea of single living in part because as a lifelong bachelor, I had had my ups and downs. I was experiencing many more ups than downs as 50 approached. And I really wanted to just share my knowledge. I wanted to create a resource that I wish I had when I was in my 20s, especially, and struggling with being single, and in my 30s when I was struggling with being single. And I started it sort of as an exploration. I launched a podcast, not really being an expert, just being comfortable with the topic and wanting to take a different view of single living, which is oftentimes it's viewed as temporary, it's viewed as less than. It's like, oh, I'm sure you'll find your person kind of dinner conversation. And rather to flip it and look at what are the opportunities that come from being single. and to celebrate this time in life, whether it be for now or forever. And then most recently tried to take those 200 episodes and put them into a guide and into a book, so someone doesn't have to spend hundreds of hours figuring this out.
And you mentioned, being sad in your 20s and 30s. What did you previously feel about being single? And then what did you learn that you're wanting to share?
I wouldn't say that my experience as a single person is special, right? I can't speak for all singles. But my personal story was one where at age 15, I was already putting off marriage. It wasn't something that I saw for me as a path to happiness. I've never been anti-marriage. I just think it happens to be overprescribed. There's a big world out there, and I wanted to explore it, and I wanted to grow and to achieve and to escape my little world in South Jersey. As I got into my 20s, I was a little bit hapless with the ladies. It's not an uncommon experience for young men. Even still, I wanted to find love. I wanted romance. I wanted a girlfriend. But even still, as that started to happen for me, especially in my 30s, I realized that I didn't want to take it to its eventual end. I never felt strongly about having children. Now I don't even really want to live with a partner. And so I always just felt like a misfit. The world makes you feel like there's something wrong with you if you A, can't do this thing, which I couldn't at first, or B, don't want to do this thing. And when I say this thing, I mean this one highly valuable relationship that everybody is supposed to do, and they're supposed to do it really, really well. And so I kind of came to this, and we can talk about the transformation from being single to solo, which I hope you'll be able to do today. I found that to be very liberating, and I was able to start to shed this feeling of there's something wrong with me, in particular, because when I looked at every other element of my life, it was largely good. And so I wanted to start to share my experience.
When you talk about the difference between being single and you're like, no, I'm solo, what the difference there for you?
I like to say this, not all singles are solo, and not all solos are single. So,
okay.
Right?
Yeah.
One of the major messages is that I want to transcend relationship status.
Mm-hmm.
People want to know whether you're single or not, so they know how to treat you. But whether someone is single or not tells you almost nothing about them.
Well, it tells me if I can hit on you, which is why I want to know. That's
that's
one of mine.
Touche. I think that's fine. But here's the other thing. Just knowing whether someone is not single doesn't mean that they're not available. Right.
But for me, I don't want it. I don't want it.
Okay. You're not looking for ethical non-monogamy or polyamory. But what I'm saying is, even then, right, knowing whether someone is not single doesn't tell you enough about them. Knowing someone's relationship status doesn't tell you whether they prefer the beach or the mountains, whether they prefer the city or the farm. It doesn't tell you what their hobbies are. It doesn't tell you how happy they are. It doesn't tell you whether they're blue collar or white collar. It doesn't tell you almost anything about them except this status. And so I want people to look beyond that. And so the notion of being solo is independent of relationship status. It's about identity. It's about how you see yourself and how you behave in the world. So there are three characteristics of solos. The first one, and the most important one, is that a solo is wholehearted. That is, they don't see themselves as incomplete, as half of a whole, walking around, waiting for their other person to come into their life and complete them. I remember the exact moment when this happened. I was age 38, and I was grieving the loss of a relationship. A woman, I call her the fashionista in the book. We were deeply in love with each other, but couldn't make the relationship work because she wanted children and I didn't. And so it had to end.
Yeah.
And I was like a mess for a year over this. And I remember where I was in my apartment where I had this revelation, which was, I am happy when I'm single. Right? I am happy when I'm single. I don't need this. Now, I may want it. I wanted to have something with the fashionista, but it couldn't happen. And that changed everything because I no longer felt less than, like I was in some liminal space and less of a person, half of a whole, until I find my person. No, you can be in a relationship and not feel like half of a whole. Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. And you can be not in a relationship and not feel half of a whole. So how do you two do on this critical characteristic of solohood?
First, I think that's a beautiful, even when in the throes of a break, because it sounds like you were very sad about the breakup, but you still knew about yourself, right? That you are happy being single. So that just feels really revelatory. I'm recently married, but I never felt like half of a whole. No, I don't want to feel that. That's not the way that I want to live.
Is that giving you the ick?
Yeah, it kind of does. No, we're very much two whole people.
Yeah.
And even when dating, which was very difficult for me, I would say that I felt like a whole. I was upset at times, but there was never a feeling of I'm incomplete.
That's wonderful. Congratulations. And by the way, it doesn't mean that you can't have a deep bond with someone. It doesn't mean that you can't integrate them into your life, but it leads to interdependence more than codependence. If you think of yourself as half of a whole, now you're in a relationship that may not be going very well, but the alternative, which is going back to being less than, is so unappealing that it doesn't allow you to fully take care of yourself sometimes.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
no, that's a great segue to me, Peter. That's the perfect. Because Bob's is so great. I'll tell her about dating things and she's like, well, it's not you. I'm like, obviously it's me. And when I got your pitch email back in November about your book, I think I sent it to Bob's and I was like, this is the most depressing thing. Like 1 out of 4 millennials aren't going to get married. It's going to be me. And these people are thriving and I want to be, I am not thriving. I'm so sad about it. And so I was like, this is the most depressing thing. I since feel more thriving and more comfortable.
Okay.
But at the time, I was very sad last fall about it. It's not necessarily that I feel like less whole. I think I have a full life, but it would be great to have a partner to share things with when most of my friends now are married or can't hang out with me as much. And then I do want to have kids. Obviously, people can have them on their own, but for me, it would be nice to have a partner to share that responsibility and cost and all of those things. So for me, it felt like, okay, well, we can't go to the next level unless we have a little husband. We're stuck at whatever level we're at. And all of our friends are with the babies and the husband.
Well, first of all, I don't want to be too cheeky about this. This is deeply challenging situations, especially at particular stages of life.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that comes up for singles is this notion of waiting either hopelessly or hopefully. And that waiting is very strongly culturally determined. You know, the world is telling you how to behave, what you want, and how you're supposed to do it. And most people, our superpower as humans is following the rules. It's the thing that allows us to get along, to cooperate. And I'm not saying that this particular set of stages, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think it works for lots of people. What I want to highlight is it doesn't work for everyone and it doesn't work for all stages in life. What I want people to do is to choose it. That is to say, I want this thing because I've looked deeply at it and it's the best fit for me at this stage in life, rather than I want this thing because that's what everybody does. And I think that there can be something rather liberating about choosing it or comfortably choosing an alternative. This actually is sort of a nice segue into the second characteristic. But in no ways does this minimize the challenges that you're facing. They're very real challenges. So the second characteristic of a solo, and I'm guessing that both of you will say this affirmatively, solos, they have a sense of autonomy. They have a self-reliant streak. I say that they are a good parent to themselves. That is, that they don't need someone to come in and solve their problems. Again, what this allows is choice. It allows you to then create this interdependent connection as a result. Now, for me, that started super young. So I mentioned I was 15, already putting off marriage. Well, I was also already working. I was tending to a house for a single mother. I knew how to do my laundry. I kind of grew up fast in a sense. And I remember in my early 40s having a really wonderful girlfriend. And I got to meet her not so great mom. And at the end of the weekend, the mother said to her daughter, he doesn't need you. And that was meant as a warning. It wasn't a compliment. It wasn't like, wow, this guy adores you and he can cook for himself. He can clean for himself. He knows how to soothe himself. He's choosing you, even though he doesn't have to have you. But for her, that was the script. If you want to keep a man, he needs to be dependent on you. So how are you doing on this?
I feel good about that.
Yeah. I'm okay on that one. I am the baby of my family by several years.
Right.
Never had to learn too much cooking or anything like that. But no, I've always been able to take care of myself.
But by the way, it's not, again, this is just whether you're a solo or not. It can work for you. I actually had Dan Savage on my podcast, and he does not pass this characteristic. He's like, no, without my husband, I could not function. He's very clear about what his limitations are. I think that happens with artists sometimes, right? You have an artist in the relationship and a manager in the relationship, and it manages to work. But the problem, of course, is that this bond, this nuclear family, two people coming together and becoming one, is actually surprisingly risky. We don't think of it as risky, but it's risky, right? Someone dies, someone divorces you, someone becomes disabled, and you're out there on an island and you're not equipped for that kind of situation. I think that oftentimes the kind of nuclear family isolates themselves too much. And one thing about singles, setting aside the lonely ones, most singles are not lonely. They actually have more friends than married people. They're more likely to be involved in their communities because they have a broader range of people in their life because they're less isolated.
I mean, they have more time.
I know that's part of the celebration.
Yeah.
Well, but you have to also understand this. They have time because they haven't defaulted into this one type of relationship that demands all of your time and attention. You don't need to have that relationship. You can have a relationship in which you both have free time for yourselves. You both vacation separately. You can decide to have these things. It's just the rules say this person's your everything, and they crowd out and have veto power over large swaths of your life. You're making a face.
I meant more like people with little kids. They just don't have the time.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, I get that.
Like they're like, oh, it's preschool, it's pickup, it's dance, it's whatever. So as a single, I have more time to do the things that I love, which I appreciate.
You're doing lots of things, filling your time. The last one came to me very late in life. Actually, I needed to launch a podcast to get there. And that is that solos tend to be unconventional thinkers. That is, they question the rules of relationships. And once you start questioning the rules of relationships, you start questioning kind of everything. That you've been given this menu, and it's a very limited menu, and says, this is what you have to choose from. And you go, maybe there's other restaurants out there that have a bigger menu. And so that opens up possibilities, a chance to design your life and to design your relationships based upon who your partners are, based upon what your needs are.
I do have all this time and I want to fill it with things that are meaningful and not just watching a lot of reality television.
Right.
How can people consciously design a life that is meaningful for them and the things that they want to do and the things that excite them and that they're passionate about?
In the book, I present a model of well-being about what it means to live a remarkable life, as I like to say.
Which you sign your emails with. We love that too.
Love it, yeah. After we read your emails, I'm like, I should go live remarkably.
Go live remarkably. You only got one shot.
Do that today.
Yes. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's very nice. The world tends to tell you that there's one way to live. But really, there's not one remarkable life. There are remarkable lives. And I think that there are sort of two elements to it. And we're going to steal a metaphor that Scott Barry Kaufman talks about. And is I want people to imagine their life like a sailboat. There are two elements of a sailboat. There's the hull and there's the sail. Those are the two most important elements. The hull keeps you afloat and can keep you afloat in turbulent waters. And there's three elements that make up your hull, which are, I call the foundational elements of a remarkable life. And that is your health, your wealth, and your social connections. Health and wealth go without saying, and it's part of this idea of being able to parent yourself, of being able to take care of yourself. And then the social connections are broad, right? It doesn't have to be a life partner. It could be friends, it could be family, community involvement, but the idea is to greater or lesser degrees, we are social creatures. We need to have connections in our life, to have emotional support, to have people give us advice, to people to be companions, to spend time with, to laugh with, to cry with, to have adventures with, and so on. And that's even if you tend towards solitude, as I do. I live alone. I want to live alone, but I have a broad, deep roster to pull on depending on what I want to do. And one of the ways I think about it is someone doesn't have to be everything to. So my friend Julie, my soul sister, I've known her for 20 years, and Julie doesn't come to game night, and I don't go to her live concerts, but she's always available for a call. She's always available for a hike. She doesn't have to be my everything, even though I love this woman. She is just such an important person. And we've never had sex, and we never will. It's completely platonic. And I have lots of Julie-like people in my life. So that's the whole. And most people struggle just to stay afloat, to pay the bills, to take care of their health, to get out of pain, whatever their situation is, to have healthy relationships in their life. The sail is important for catching wind, for what I say is flourishing. So this is the foundation flourish model. And what Scott talks about, which I really like, is that your sail can be down because you're dealing with the hull, or you could be catching wind. And we've all had that feeling where you just are catching wind and things are just going. And the thing about it is that if you can imagine an ocean with 8 billion boats, some are overturned, some of them are just sitting there, others are just flying along, having the time of their lives there. Now, the issue, though, is that while all three of the elements of the hull are necessary, the elements of the sail can change, can depend on the person, and can depend on where they are in life. And so the three elements are this. The first one is purpose, right? So you've just alluded to purpose. Purpose has two parts. It can be a meaningful life, doing something bigger than yourself for others. That could be raising children. It could be curing cancer. It could be digging wells in Africa. You know, there's any number of these ways you could do it. It can be achievement, doing something bigger than yourself for yourself, getting a PhD, running a marathon, building a business, and so on. The second one is engagement, is living a creative life, the life that you two are living right now on this podcast, a life that can be flow-worthy and engaging and solving problems, the artist's way, so to speak. And then the last one is, and this is not to be trivialized, but it's a life of positivity, of positive emotions, of love, laughter, good sex, good food, feeling good, energized, and so on. Now, some of these things conflict with each other. It's hard to live a life that's filled with positive emotions when you're raising kids, because you have to set aside sleep, fun things to do because you're doing this meaningful activity. Or the person who's climbing Everest is not living a pleasant life. And so what happens is you can move, as I have, from a life of achievement that was athletic endeavors and academic endeavors to a life of meaning, which is me supporting single people to the best of my ability around the world. And so you can imagine these changes in life as a result. I like to say, I can't tell you which of the paths that you need to follow, to mix my metaphors. That's up to you. But I can say, if you're living the life you want to be living, then you're likely living a remarkable life.
We have to get to the 4 types of singles.
Types of singles,
To explain that.
Okay, so I think your listeners will likely be able to identify with at least one of these. They may be a little bit of a hybrid. They're not strict categories. So the first category is a pure single. They're not a solo, okay? They're a very traditionally minded person. They are the hopeless romantic, feeling incomplete until they find the one. And if they don't, they'll look back on their life with regret. And I feel bad for these folks because I think this is a difficult place to be, in part because their success is somewhat out of their control. If you live in a place that doesn't have lots of singles, you have other things that you needed to take care of, you have particular proclivities that make it hard to find the perfect person, you can find yourself in a potentially regrettable situation. So Charlotte from Sex and the City is a someday single. That should resonate. She doesn't date men who she doesn't see a life with. The remaining 3 are solos. So they have those characteristics. So the just may wants to ride the relationship escalator, wants a traditional relationship, but they feel differently about it. They are hopeful romantics. Mm-hmm. They would like this to happen, but they're not waiting around, putting their life on hold until this happens. They're not waiting to take that trip to Paris to see the Eiffel Tower because they're, hopefully they'll someday find their person to go with them. They're not waiting to move to a new city or buy a condo or do something that you're supposed to do with someone else. And they're not going to be regretful if it doesn't work out. They'll look back and they'll say, I lived a great life. I gave that a shot. It just didn't happen to work. But look at the wonderful opportunities that I had because I was open to living life independent of this particular style of life partner. The third is actually a surprisingly large group. It's the no way singles. And so Pew Center says that half of American adults are single in the United States, and half of them are not interested in dating, sex, or romance at the moment. A huge group of people. So if someone's listening to this and they're in that place, know that you are not alone. You're far from alone. It's just we don't have any conversations around these people. They're not represented in commercials, in movies, in TV, in love songs, but they're focused on other things aside from their romantic and or sex life. And then the last group is the smallest group. I've already alluded to them earlier, and they are the fastest growing group. There's the sexiest group, in my opinion.
You say that as their leader, Peter.
I'm biased because I'm part of this group, and that is the new way singles. So these are the folks who are interested in sex and or relationship, but they're relaxing or removing the rules. So maybe they're not interested in living with a partner. Maybe they're ethically non-monogamous or polyamorous. Maybe they're looking for more of a friends with benefits. They're dating with intention, but in a way that doesn't stick to the norms. And I think one of the things that happens, there's a lot of singles out there like that. They can't make a traditional relationship work because it doesn't fit for them. And as a result, they think there's something wrong with them. I thought there was something wrong with me for years because I didn't want to move in with this wonderful woman, right? And so there must be something wrong with me. And what I realized was, oh, no. Well, first of all, there's plenty of things wrong with me. But the problem in that situation was the relationship. She wanted the traditional relationship, so she was good. I didn't want the traditional relationship, so I was bad. But rather, we just needed to agree that we wanted different things, and neither was good and neither was bad in that sense. Samantha's like a new way from Sex and the City, and Carrie and Miranda are just mays. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There are no ways in Sex and the City because it's called Sex and the City. You can't have someone who's not interested in dating on that show.
Thank you for laying all of that out. As you were talking, one thing I realized is I feel like I've kind of swung between when I was dating the someday and the just may. And I'm just remembering so many of the decisions I made when I was in the someday state of mind were very bad. So many things I waited on to do that I didn't do because I was waiting. And when I was in the just may state of mind, I lived truly a much better life and I really moved things forward. And I don't think I thought about it that way till you laid it out like that.
Can I say this? I actually think this is super counterintuitive for some people, but being a someday is actually not that appealing.
Duh.
Because it reeks of desperation.
Yeah.
And so who do you want to go out with? The person who's like, oh, I'd love to go out with you. I'd love to meet you for coffee, but I'm going to Paris tomorrow. I'll give you a call when I get back. Or the person who's like, 6 a.m., 5 a.m., how early can you meet? It's very exciting for someone who's living their life unapologetically. And then you're like, oh, I want a little bit of that in my life.
No, absolutely. I remember I was like, I don't want to buy a house, but I want to wait. Mm-hmm. Now the interest rate is at 7% now. What did I do? I completely missed those COVID interest just because I was so stuck on this. And
I
it's
say,
like,
what are you
that's
waiting
crazy.
for?
Yeah.
What are you
I
waiting
don't
for?
know.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
You're waiting for that perfect moment in your head that every rom-com was like, no,
I know.
it'll be so good. And when you're like, oh, it's not as, duh, Peter, it's not appealing. And it doesn't feel good either. I used to be so sad waiting for this person. And now I'm like, no, girl, we can do things. We can go to Red Rocks by ourselves. That's fine. We can go to Sedona, whatever, what have you. No, of course she was sad, Peter. Charlotte was so sad. I'm Charlotte. I'm Eleanor. What else do we have time to? What's our most important questions do you feel like, Bubs? Do we have anything else that's like needs to be asked?
You talked a little bit about being new way. How does that influence the way that you live your life?
Ooh, good question.
I appreciate you asking this question. So I think one of the things that becomes really important if you want to embrace a solo identity is you have to get really honest with yourself. You just have to start by being ruthlessly honest with who you are, what you want, where are your challenges in life, what is it that you desire. And then you have to be honest, not ruthlessly honest, but you have to be kindly honest with the people in your life, and especially the people that you're going to date. One of the things that happened for me when I was younger, and I'm embarrassed by this, was I never outright lied, but I didn't always tell the full truth about what my desires were.
Mm-hmm.
And any heterosexual woman in particular has had this experience there. And so as I was working on the solo project, I was coming back to Colorado. I had been doing a sabbatical in Los Angeles, and I was just sort of over traditional dating. I wasn't happy. The women I was going out with wasn't happy. We were just mismatching in a sense. And I just decided that I was going to just own who I am as a Samantha, as wanting a relationship, but not a traditional kind of one. And I was like, I'm going to be completely honest from Jump Street. And if this means that I have to be celibate as a result of it, so be it. At least I'll be living my authentic life. What I've been pleasantly surprised by is that honesty is really sexy. And that even though I wasn't always saying exactly what she wanted, she was like, well, at least I can trust this guy. Moreover, we can't assume that the whole world wants this one thing. There are lots of people who want non-traditional connections. And it doesn't mean that they are not deep. It doesn't mean they're not meaningful. It doesn't mean they're not important, but they desire to do them in a healthy, honest, safe kind of way. And so I think one of the places to start is I have a chapter, and I also have a podcast episode on relationship design. And it's about how do you co-create a relationship. This, by the way, it doesn't have to be romantic. It doesn't have to be sexual. This could be in any area of your life. But how do you talk about what is it that you want? What is it that you need? What are the agreements? What are the expectations? And you regularly revisit those things to maintain happiness within the relationship. And so rather than defaulting, you now design a relationship. And that has been really incredible for me.
Amazing. I think the message out there is to all the heterosexual men out there, be honest about what you want.
Be honest.
It's sexy.
Amen. Amen. Like, yeah.
Lastly, for you, Peter, if people want to know more information about you and your work, how can they follow you, get more deets?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think the best place to go is to my website, petermcgraw.org/solo. It has all the resources for singles and non-singles who want to live a remarkable life.
Peter, thank you so much for chatting with us today. The thing that sticks out for me is the sailing metaphor, and is my hull intact? And then what can I do to catch that wind and live that remarkable life? What about you, Bubs? What do you think you're going to take?
So much stuff. I was just thinking when you were talking about time and how society kind of makes it so we default to all this time. I got married when I was 37. I'm 38 now. We've been 6 months married. I used to take these week-long, 10-day-long trips with friends, some of my best memories. And for some reason, I kind of put it in my mind, like, that's done now. Like, how will we do those? And now I'm like, it doesn't have to be like that if we are purposeful. Let's keep doing that. That's fine. That'll be great.
I think it'll be good for your relationship. Esther Perel talks about the conflict between novelty and comfort. And if you want to ruin your sex life, have a very comfortable relationship where you're always together. And if you want to add a little bit of excitement to your sex life, take a break and don't see the person and experience life. And you will come back and you're like, let's talk and let's, you know what?
You know what?
No, but just that idea of a roster of people. Like, yes, everybody.
Oh God, Bob, I thought you meant men. I was like, he's not talking about that break from your husband. No, but what I love,
people,
friends. But what I love too, Bob, when you said if you maintain those trips that were so fulfilling for you, also you are maintaining who the husband that we're not allowed to name on the podcast fell in love with. It's you. It's your essence. That's right. So, audience, if anything has moved you from what Peter said today, we would love to know. Find us on Instagram at Most Self-Improved, all one word. We look forward to connecting. And if you have any single friends of any of the 4 types, and according to Peter's stats, we know that you do them a favor. Share this episode with them. We would appreciate it. We think they would appreciate it. And we hope you have a great week.